Okay. There we go.
It happens.
We should be, because I just refreshed for ads. So, yes, we're in the right spot. I can see me. I can see Terry. I think we're good to go.
Hey,
look at that.
How about that?
Here's what we're going to do,
right.
all right?
I always forget that people can't hear Tyler when he's talking to us, so
right.
We just had a few seconds of dead air to start.
For all the people that are wondering where we were, what we were doing is Terry is just going to sit back. He's got a nice, huge pot of coffee that just got ready to go. So Tyler has cut up the last 15 minutes, and we're just going to play it while Terry kicks his feet up and watches a little baseball tonight, because I'm blaming you for this with your omen at the start of the show.
Hey, you were the one who said you wanted 15 more minutes to watch the end of that Clippers game, man. I just said I would give it to you. So
no, that's how after this wasn't even my team. You were on with me. We were doing an NBA show a couple of weeks ago, and you didn't even flinch. If I didn't even tell you the Knicks were on, I don't think anybody would even know. So no, I owed it to you to be fully attentive here and do everything.
That is how you kicked us off, and we were deep. I thought we covered the first part of that Brooklyn and Celtics game pretty damn well. Had a lot of valuable info to say. Spoke for like 5 minutes just off the cuff, and off into the void it went.
Here's what we're going to do. All right. We are live before lock. And yes, we have about 42 and a half minutes to get you ready for the 2-game slate. Here's the good news is that there aren't 15 games tonight, right, Terry? It's not like we have to go back and run through about 6 or 7 games. It's 2 games. We were going to drag some stuff out anyway to try to get to some deeper value. So for the people that are just joining us, remember, this is another opportunity. Remind you to like, to share, to subscribe, and of course that notification bell so you don't miss shows like this. Even when we miss a little bit of the show, you don't want to miss anything because the chat was buzzing right there at the top of the hour. So let's just kind of streamline what we were talking about from the start of the show, Terry, with Brooklyn. And as simple as we can get, the big 3. How do we approach kind of not really knowing what to expect from the big 3 minutes, usage, and also because you can take your time now that we know we have to go backtrack a little bit. Also, on a lesser extent, how that factors in really from the trickle-down effect of other guys on Brooklyn.
Sure. So like we just discussed, but like you guys have also heard some of the other shows, of course, discussed through the day. You're getting the big 3 for Brooklyn with only 200 and change minutes having been played together as a unit all season long. In that sample, Durant was the big time leader in usage overall, but I don't think that's reliable enough that we can just kick back and say, all right, Kevin Durant's the guy here. He's going to be the alpha in this offense when they play together, and he's going to run away with all the usage. He was around 29%. Typically, you saw these guys when 2 of them went, one would be up over 30, the other one would land in the mid 20s. With Durant going around 29%, I think it's more likely that settles down into the 25, 26 range, and we see Harden come up a few points from the low 20s that he was at, and then maybe Kyrie land in around the low 20s, high teens. I think that kind of makes sense considering the roles for these guys in a traditional offense, with Kyrie being the point guard, maybe seeing a little bit more of the distribution duties, and then Harden and Durant being the guys we relied on to score, seeing a little bit more of the usage. But it's wildly unpredictable. And given the fact that we're paying up for all of these guys, it probably makes sense to consider, like you pointed out when we were speaking to one another, that it makes a lot of sense if these guys are going to score 140 points tonight. Probably 2 of these guys are going to hit value. Probably 2 of these guys are going to deliver. And we do have the raw points consideration that we need. So we do want to think about rostering these guys. I'm curious to see. I'm just reloading Fantasy Cruncher here. I want to rerun the crunches that I mentioned before, see what's changed. But I'm going to try and run some unencumbered crunches, just using the optimal values, not using any randomness, and just see where things kind of shake out among these guys and among some of the other highly ranked plays on the board for us here in this wacky 2-game slate, where it's going to be very much a matter of grabbing raw points and then how things fit together and trying to find unique ways to roster some of these players together, which is going to be really, really challenging. I'm going to be surprised if we see a unique lineup win tonight.
Do you have any rosters at all that have 0 exposure to the big 3 tonight? Any or at all?
Let me rerun these crunches and see how that comes out. Like I said, I'm going to be just running these using the optimal with Alex's projections. I just want to see where the boss's numbers are coming down in those distributions. And the last time I ran it, it was interesting. It came down where I was getting to not very much Kevin Durant at all, pulling some Kyrie Irving, excuse me, and a limited amount of James Harden, and then getting to some of the Brooklyn value plays, which kind of surprised me. But then when I'm looking at where it's spending up, and I'm running this as I'm talking about it on FanDuel right now, it is definitely giving a big allocation of the shooting guard minutes on FanDuel to Marcus Smart and CJ McCollum, who I really, really like tonight. And then basically the remainder goes to James Harden. There is a very limited player pool at shooting guard where we're required to roster 2 shooting guards on this FanDuel slate. Behind those guys, you're talking about Bruce Brown, Aaron Nesmith, Landry Shamet, and Romeo Langford as your viable remaining shooting guards at the position. And that's it. So basically everybody's going to be rotating through those 3 guys at the shooting guard spot. Does it make sense to try and get to some Bruce Brown, some Aaron Nesmith, some Landry Shamet? Not really, when they're projected for 13 points, 10 points, FanDuel points, not real life points.
Right.
So at shooting guard on FanDuel, it's very tricky. So I think maybe it makes some sense to try and push up to more James Harden if that's how optimizers are coming out with it. But it's not like he's not getting projected for a lot of ownership. So the ownership that I'm getting through optimizing it with those optimal lineups with Alex's and no randomness there is falling short of the field's projection for Harden, which is an interesting way to play it. I'm not sure that it's the right way to play it. So tonight might be a night where you need to, kind of get in here and manipulate the optimizers to give you what you want as compared to what we need, which is what we're shooting for in a lot of basketball slates.
Let's look at 2 guys kind of in that whole mentality and applying the optimizer on just Brooklyn itself and really dealing with this variable that none of the other teams tonight have to deal with. And that's the big 3, not really knowing and questioning the minutes or really the production and the usage more so than anything else. But you've got Jeff Green, who is super cheap at 3,900 and super low owned, just under 4%, looking at it here for DraftKings. And then also we have Blake Griffin, who similar is not going to be super expensive at 4,400, but on the flip side is just under 37% owned. If you were looking at either of the 2, is there a factor that would maybe be the key reason why you would choose, or maybe a key deterrent as to why you would fade?
So I think there's more minutes reliability probably in Blake. We've got him projected for around 24, 25 minutes. I think that's probably a little bit more reliable. We've got Jeff Green right there at 19.7 minutes. So, figure 20 to 22. It's just going to be under a little bit. And considering that they're basically the same price on the FanDuel slate, you get Green a little bit less expensive on DK, but I don't know that we're going to need that savings to go there. So I think there's just more upside in Blake, particularly if they're pulling somewhat similar ownership projections. Excuse me, that's wrong. I was seeing the Aaron Gordon ownership projection, not the Jeff Green one. So Green is significantly lower owned, which would be the appeal, I guess, if we're talking about him. But he's another guy that's coming in with kind of a low raw point total, only around 13 fantasy points on both sites. You're just going to need more than that. Now, he is kind of in play as a mix-in option for sure, because like I said, you are going to be looking for some guys with reliable minutes from those price points that you can kind of plug in. So getting a guy who does, he's got upside into the mid-20s. I'll say that at least, which is kind of what we're going to be looking for when we go down to that price point and start throwing some of these guys in to mix and match our lineup combination. So I don't think he's off the board by any means, but my preferred guy in that situation, the guy I think is more reliable to give us a fantasy total that's going to be relevant and kind of going to be necessary, would be Blake.
3 guys, DraftKings at least, that are 10K plus, and we mentioned James Harden across the board. Tatum is the other one, and then I imagine that there are few lineups tonight where you're not playing Joker, right?
Yeah, just looking at what just came up in the crunches that I ran here. Looks like you're getting a lot more diversity on the FanDuel slate, where we only get 1 crack at center, as compared to DK. Using just the center position. Now, some of the other guys who are eligible at center probably mixing around the edges here, but looking at just the center position across 100 lineups, I got Joker in 100 out of 100 using just the points with no randomness. So as far as the optimals, you need to run at least 100 optimals before Joker's not optimal. I can extend that out and see how many we need to run before we even get one where he's not in the optimal. Which is an interesting exercise. I'll keep an eye on it. It's running right now. The other guys, you're getting there a little bit since you do have that multi-position. Like alongside 100% Joker, I'm also pulling down 75, 78 now percent Nurkic at the center. So it's really interesting, just given the flexibility between the two, between the utility spot, the center spot, and some of the other multi-position eligibilities. It's very interesting on the DK slate. But yeah, it would be a total mouthful of Joker here for sure.
Just real quick on the FanDuel, because I think this helps, especially when you look at it from a visual, where you only do, similar to MLB, right, where you're locked into one pitcher and you're trying to find the reason to fade the heavy favorite. And you mentioned Nurkic is clearly the other option, especially when you look at the rest here, if it's Thompson or Cantor or anybody else that you would be at the bottom as far as an option. So why Nurkic? And I ask from the DFS standpoint because I hate this matchup just individually for Nurkic, trying to slow Jokic down in any capacity. So I wonder, the ownership fades my point, the probabilities fade that point, and even the price, you can make an argument, is on this 2-game slate, maybe a little low for a guy who's predicted to do so much, or at least based off ownership is predicted to do so much. So I'm sure I'm missing something obvious with Nurk, Terry, but I really don't like that matchup at all for him.
Yeah, I definitely don't love the spot in terms of, the basketball matchup. What I think we're really going to have to focus on, though, is the fact that he's over 30 minutes. And we've only got a limited amount of guys, particularly on FanDuel again, where we can even roster them at center. So after Nurk, nobody else is over 30 minutes projection. We've got Tristan Thompson now covering 25 and a half, basically, with Time Lord slipping down to 18. Given the news that he is available, though, I have to question, whether we're going to see an exact split of minutes between the. I don't know necessarily how that Boston front court is going to break down. Robert Williams dealing with the turf toe injury, and we saw him, he's basically hobbled. He's going to be out there trying to gut it out. So I would question the upside for him in general in playing through that injury. And then I would definitely question just how much we're going to see of him. Beyond that, we've got, JaVale McGee on the board for like 5 minutes. We've got Enes Kanter on the board for like 15 minutes, and there isn't anybody else. So it's really just a trick of these are the guys who are available at the position. So the way that's breaking down on that FanDuel crunch, it's coming up around 58% of Nikola Jokic, 33% of Nurk, and then 5% to Tristan Thompson, 4% to Robert Williams. So it's basically splitting that last 10% between the two Celtics. That's really the shape of this slate.
Yeah, and I imagine that has a lot to do, and we can look at the pricing of it as well. Real quick, as far as Spencer is concerned, I appreciate the sentiments, but I'm about 6.5 months away from a birthday. So I don't know if you misread something on social or what. And look, I'll always take a happy birthday from everybody, but I did want to at least, I know we strive for accuracy here at Awesemo, Terry, so I at least wanted to clarify that one. That one I know I can get right.
The data-driven analysis was off on the birthday there by
just
about
a little
half
bit.
A year, huh?
Just a little. We didn't need to crunch that. There was no optimizer for that. I could pretty much come out essentially and say that. So let's look at an obvious play then. It's just putting both Nurk because of the price and Jokic in the same lineup and just pounding away, right?
Yeah, it seems like that is coming up on the DK slate. It's significantly optimal. Oh, looks like we just passed. We've got somewhere in the around 200 lineups. We finally got one without a Nikola Jokic on DK. So
wow.
across 276 lineups where I just stopped it, he's in 272 of them. Hammer Nikola Jokic on this slate, particularly where you can move guys around, play guys alongside him. And then going back to the FanDuel slate, just because he's coming up 58% of the time in the optimal doesn't mean you can't exceed that. That's telling us that he is going to be most likely the best play in this slate. So you don't want to just dash off the top 100 optimal lineups and enter them, because then you're really guaranteeing that you're going to be duped. You're most likely going to be duped anyway on this slate. But if you wanted to just put a hammerlock on Nikola Jokic ownership, at least take it up over 75%, I don't see a problem with that. I don't think there's so much upside in Nurk or the other two of the Boston centers that, if you wanted to pick your poison with a Boston guy, throw him in 5%, cut some Nurkic out of your life, and take the Jokic ownership up on FanDuel, I would have no objection to that. I think it's fine.
Speaking of two guys, now different teams, of course, but in this case, in the backcourt with Portland and looking at them individually as well as collectively, we've got CJ. You mentioned earlier on, I think that might have been you and I, or maybe when the stream just came back, but referencing CJ and then putting that in context with Dame and playing Dame tonight, but also the two of them in the backcourt together, how smart that could be versus how much they may take away from each other's usage if that gets to the point, especially with so much with Nurkic maybe coming up front.
Yeah. So again, it's difficult. We have to kind of change just the way we think about these things in terms of guys from the same team, guys in the same backcourt, guys we don't necessarily always like to play together, although I usually don't mind getting to Dame and CJ together, particularly when CJ is low priced, which he kind of is on this slate, 75 on FanDuel, 79 on DK. That's at worst a fair price for CJ. So even on a normal slate, I'd be okay with it. It's not something I'm going out of my way for on a normal slate, but on this kind of a slate, particularly this slate with this shape on FanDuel, I think it's almost unavoidable. I really like this game. I really like this spot, the Trailblazer side of it. So I think we're going to have a lot of it here. Looks like Dame, if we're going straight, via those pure optimals, coming up around 25% of the time, where I mentioned CJ was coming up around 87% of the time.
Yeah.
So we're, if you're calling it which one is more optimal, it looks like it's going to be CJ, but that's also just a product of the fact that we've got more options at the point guard position on this slate. We've got Facundo Campazzo in play. We've got Kemba in play. We've got Kyrie in play. You can even talk me into some Monty Morris or Austin Rivers shares if I had to. I don't know about the Anthony Simon and the Peyton Pritchard that are trickling in here. There's 4 of those lineups. I don't know that those are my necessarily favorite ones, but there's at least a few playable options where at shooting guard, again, we're really talking about 3 guys. We're talking about Marcus Smart, CJ McCollum, and James Harden. I think it's a rotation of those guys. That's FanDuel specific. On DK, you get a lot more flexibility. We've got looks like about 8 or 9 guys at shooting guard that came up in the 275 lineups we've got now on DK. Similar mix of those guys on the point guard position, but you can uniquely also roster both Dame and CJ at point guard on DK. You can get to throw some Norm Powell in the mix with that at the shooting guard spot on DK. There's all different ways to put things together. So you're much more likely to be able to put together a unique combination of guys on the DraftKings slate as well. Something to keep in mind just when you're considering which site to play on for a slate like this.
You mentioned Walker, and I know that Marcus Smart was the ire of a lot of people's frustration early on the chat when the video was down, but the chat was still going on. People were warning others to stay away from Smart. But Walker, we have him high on Alex's boom bust projection. There are only about, 4 guys ahead of him, Tatum being one of them. Looks like he still over 30% as far as the optimal percentage. So Walker, 7,500. I know price doesn't dictate a lot on a 2-game slate, Terry, but Walker, the more you look at it, seems to be better and better of a play if, in fact, you were going to pivot in the backcourt from one, if not both, of the Portland Trailblazers. Yeah,
and you're getting these guys without Jaylen Brown on the court, so I expect nice games from decent big upside game potential from Jason Tatum for sure, and then at worst a very good game out of Kemba and a very nice game out of Marcus Smart, who I really like on this slate. I don't know why people are hating on him. He's going to be owned significantly, but he's super cheap, and he is their best defensive player. He's going to have to. Somebody's got to guard the trio of stars that we talked about. He's going to be out on the court all he can eat today. As long as he stays out of foul trouble trying to guard Kyrie and James Harden, I see no way he doesn't play 36 to 40 minutes at a minimum. So, yeah, I smash Marcus Smart here. If I was locking anybody on the slate, I think it would probably be him. I know he's a guy who tends to come up with empty when we really fire away on him, but we can't rely on that. We can rely on the fantasy production, the minutes that are going to be there. Across all situations, is a .90 fantasy player. That's not taking into account that they're playing without Jaylen Brown. He's going to need to do more for this team. So I really like the Smart play, and I like the Kemba Walker play for a lot of those same reasons, except for the defensive part of it, really. I think there's a significant path for Kemba to get an extreme upside game. It's not like Brooklyn's going to be playing any defense whatsoever. They're just out there trying to outscore this team. This is going to be running back and forth, guys trying to score. There's not going to be any defense in this game outside of whatever Marcus Smart gives us.
I love it. That's a shout right there to pound the over. You can go to Odd Shopper right now and see it. I still have it at 231.5 if you wanted to go over that's not a terrible number with the expectation of a lot of points to be scored. And also we have a quick update on the ownership projections changing just a little bit. I'm looking at this here for DraftKings. A couple of lower cost guys have now kind of moved up to the top, and that is actually one of the free tools that you can take advantage of today. The NBA DFS ownership projections, all part of Awesemo Plus, and you can get these great tools for just $29.95 a week. It's insanely cheap, and you'll see throughout as we tell you every show about the Awesemo Hall of Fame. We will coming up in a little bit before we get out of here and the slate lock. But as far as just everything you can get from an NBA standpoint, you want to streamline the Awesemo Plus package. We have two ways you can do that. $16.95 is the Awesemo Plus NBA weekly package, and then $4.95 for the NBA Weekly Express package, and that gives you everything Awesemo Plus access, the NBA Showdown, the single game contest, and you continue to get to match all of that up with Terry, and that's a good thing. That's like a peanut butter and chocolate, man. That's a nice little mixture right there. Awesemo Plus, NBA Express package, and Terry.
You are never too old to enjoy peanut butter and chocolate. I am speaking of birthdays, a person who turned 42 not too long ago. And I had myself a nice, delicious peanut butter and chocolate sandwich the other day. And man, was it good. Just drizzle some chocolate syrup on top of peanut butter instead of jelly. Woo! That, in addition to the accidental bacon-only lunch that I had the other day, man, I'm living good.
Accidental. Yeah, right. Accidental. I think that was a planned
accident. I started with good intentions. There were supposed to be Brussels sprouts in the pan at some point, and I just didn't get there.
Now, did Spencer S. wish you a happy birthday when you turned 42?
I think that was probably the only day on any of these streams where I wasn't wished a happy birthday by somebody.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right, let's look at this change here really quick. We've had Jokic and Nurkic right there at the top. Now, look, this is a minor percentage as far as how much Norman Powell has moved ahead of Nurkic, but we've got Norman Powell just under 40% owned DraftKings, and Campazzo now slides in at 5,200 for Campazzo, 5,700 for Powell. So looking at expected minutes and usage combined with the ownership, Terry, where do you stand on both of these guys, especially because if you are going to justify paying down, you at least want to get something strong in return?
Yeah, I think they're both firmly on the board. Campazzo is certainly going to be in line for good, solid chunk of minutes and reliable minutes as well. Without parts of the backcourt there, so definitely like getting to him. And then, yeah, I think Norman Powell, I think it makes a lot of sense. He was tracking lower ownership, and it was kind of standing out as a mistake by the field. So it looks like the field's just kind of correcting itself, which is why we see the big jump there. And I think it makes a lot of sense that people are going to be getting to him. He's 5,700 multi-position eligibility, which I love between shooting guard and small forward on DK, meaning we can put him basically wherever we want in the DraftKings lineup, right? You get like 5 spots with that. So he's just got extreme flexibility, a ton of utility on that slate. And he's a guy who's going to be on the court. He's a guy, they went out and got him because he's a 3-and-D guy. I mean, I think we can expect a ton of minutes, a ton of usage. I really like the spot playing alongside the two stars there. So I think he could quietly be a pretty key player for us here with upside where, yeah, his ownership came up, but it might still be short of what his actual utility is on that DraftKings slate. I just really like the ability to move him around over there.
Is there a guy that, and I guess the higher we go with cost, maybe the better example, is there somebody who, and I'll set maybe an 8,000, 8K or higher on DraftKings, and you can apply it as far as how it can work, especially to your favor and your point to connect it on FanDuel. But is there somebody that's maybe 8K or higher that you really do want to stay away from, more so than what we mentioned with the big three, where we're just question marks? Michael Porter Jr., for example, 8,200 on DraftKings, and we do have him at nearly 32.5% owned, but I wonder if he may be, or a similar player like Michael Porter Jr. could be an example of someone, Terry, that you're fading way more than you're playing.
So what I always like to do when I'm in that spot and trying to find a guy that I'm considering, all right, am I just going to eliminate this guy from my consideration because he's popular, or because he's, I think he's too expensive, or whatever the case may be. I like to think about what I'm replacing that with in so many of my lineups. Like if the public's getting to a guy at 60 some odd percent or 40 some odd percent, there's usually a reason, particularly in basketball. Like in baseball, you can kind of get away from that if there's a lot of ownership on a specific pitcher, it's a totally different game. In basketball, we're kind of playing that game where it's just rate based. So minutes times X for their production with Y in their ownership. That's the game we're looking at. So we're trying to find those little corners of leverage on some of these guys where the production, the minutes are going to be reliable. And that's what drives the ownership up. So if we take Michael Porter, let's say, like you said, out of the pool, I don't know necessarily where I'm spending that money to get to somebody who's going to give me similar potential for upside and similar just raw point potential, especially at small forward. I've got one in Kevin Durant, who's also on that list up at 9,700. So you're paying up to make that change. Paying down looking at small forward, you got a very big drop in salary from the 82 rather, 2,000 difference down to Evan Fournier, who not the most reliable guy in the world. I don't know that I love the spot. I think he's in play, but I don't like the spot nearly as much as I do for a Michael Porter Jr., who we've got projected for 10 additional DraftKings points. I think it's a spot, especially since they're projected for somewhat similar ownership. I don't know that that necessarily makes sense as a pivot. Like, it's just something where, all right, what am I gaining by doing that? You're gaining 2,000 in salary. Where am I spending it? Is it the difference between spending that salary on, having to go all the way down and grab an Austin Rivers instead of like a Facundo Campazzo? Possibly. If that's your difference, then yeah, you can justify it. So it's a matter of thinking those things through, which, yeah, it's easier to do if you're building, a 3 max or a 20 max even, as opposed to across 150. At a certain point, you've got to trust your process, trust your optimizers to be getting those right decisions made for you. And that's where driving it through our projections, driving it through our ownership and our leverage marks really helps you land on those right constructions.
Couple of questions thrown out the chat. We also have one in the premium Slack. Azuri7 in the premium Slack, Terry, wants to know Robert Williams or Robert Covington.
Robert Covington with a bullet for me, a lot more reliable, a lot more predictable upside right now. I would not be surprised if we see Robert Williams on the court for less than 15 minutes tonight. I wouldn't be shocked if we saw him for 24. I don't think we're going to see him for 30. He's got that turf toe injury. He is very, very fragile right now. So major question mark for Robert Williams, where I think Covington is basically a lock for 35 minutes. So yeah, absolutely with a bullet Covington. He was coming up one of the more frequent overall plays for me in those crunches. I can just pull up the numbers real quick. On FanDuel, across 100 lineups, he came up in 93% of them. Again, this is just with the optimals.
Yeah.
On DraftKings, across that bigger DraftKings crunch that got out to 276 lineups, he's in 55% of them, 153. So Covington all the way in that question. And Covington enthusiastically is just a general kind of a question.
43 minutes in, and he's finally made his appearance. And I'm not talking about on the chat. I'm talking about the player himself. Ms. Unick, Jeff Green, or Melo? Where are you on? Everybody wants to know where you are on Melo tonight, Terry.
Let's see how he came up in the old crunch here so that I can answer that with a little bit of...
He's owned.
Yeah, he's definitely drawing ownership. It looks like he's coming in underneath the ownership projections in terms of where I crunched out about half of where our public ownership projections are. And I kind of like that. I don't mind being about half on Melo. He's projected for 22 minutes right now. He's super cheap, which I do like that idea of getting to a cheap Melo, playing in the playoffs, playing for his legacy, all these different things. But it's not like he's starter Melo. It's not like he's Melo from a few years ago where he's getting 36 minutes regardless of how he's playing because he's superstar, your former superstar at that point, Melo. Now he's role player Melo, which I do like. We've seen him succeed in spurts with this team. We've seen him succeed in that role specifically when he was on the Olympic teams and everything. So I think there's nice narrative there. I think there's a idea for him to see more than 22 minutes, but I don't think it's going to be much more. And I don't think it's going to be a ton of upside. So I think I'm more comfortable coming in about half the field's ownership on Melo and just getting to some of the more reliable plays. We're looking for minutes. We're looking for raw point totals. And if you're going to make that pivot to a guy who's got questionable production for you tonight, questionable minutes upside tonight, do it to a guy who's less owned than that. Don't do it to a guy who's getting 35% ownership.
Yeah, that's strong right there for Melo, of course. And look, you can look at the 4K and associate it with it, but I think people are so jacked up off of playoff Rondo that they're willing to bank on playoff Melo coming out a little bit more tonight. And I don't know. It just seems like once again, this might be one of those times where the narrative is pushing it more than maybe the numbers or just what you would look at even on a return of an optimizer or a cruncher.
Yeah, there are a few people who would love to see Carmelo Anthony win a title more than me. I am a sucker for Melo back to when he came to the Knicks. One of the few stars, if you think about it, who in the last 20 years has said, I want to go to the Knicks. I want to play in New York. Now, they completely screwed it up when he came here. But hell, I cut out of work early that day. I spent 2 hours online at Modell's, and I was like the third in line to get a Melo jersey out of the box because I wanted it and because I was psyched about this guy. So, yeah, I want to see Melo succeed here, but I don't want to be trying to push to, what do you need to get 60% of Melo on this slate to get, a reasonable amount beyond the field? It's just not worth it here. I'd love to see him do it, but I'm not going to be there with him if he does.
It's a tough life to live. Betting on Melo, putting him in your DFS lineups. Like, it's one thing to root for him as far as his career and as far as his legacy, as you mentioned, especially because of what he did going there. And I think Layla was a big part of it as well, right? Going to New York. But it's got to be a tough life to live, relying with your own money on Melo, man. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, definitely a more enjoyable watch if you don't have your money on it. You can just kind of enjoy. Maybe he has a nice little throwback game, gives us a little 20-point empty performance in a loss.
Fair enough. I'm curious just to kind of go back to where we began with Brooklyn, and it was so much with the big three. We tried to find some guys on the bottom end of it, but what about Joe Harris at 4,700 on DraftKings, being able to slot him in a couple of different places here on the lineup and just under 30% owned? Where are you looking at Harris tonight as far as your lineups and some exposure?
Yeah, it looks like he's coming up around that mark on the DK crunch that went out across all those lineups and higher on the FanDuel one, actually, just looking at some of the available small forwards over there. We talked about Michael Porter, who I like on the FanDuel slate with limited small forward selection. And then the rest of it's getting distributed out. It's got like 25% Evan Fournier, about 20% Norm Powell, about 15% of Melo in there. And then the rest of that is going to Joe Harris over Kevin Durant. This has one Kevin Durant lineup in 100, 52 Joe Harris lineups. I am not wild about that idea, but what that lets you do is spend that 4,200 at your small forward and then pay up aggressively to other valuable spots, valuable positions. That's where we're justifying. That's where we're getting to our Jokic lineups, our lineups that are well distributed with some of these other upside plays. So it's just a matter of how things come together. I'm looking at some of the pricing through these optimals as well. And it's not like these are leaving a ton of money on the table when it's making that decision, which of course you want to watch out for in basketball. But there's nothing that's leaving, like a 2,100 or something like that crazy on the table. Most of these are pushing up into the mid 59s and approaching 60 on the FanDuel slate. On DK, he comes up around 30% like the field. And I think that's about right. Like, that's where I would be more comfortable owning Joe Harris. I think he's a fine utility piece. I just don't know that he's got major upside. Like, I think Joe Harris is very likely to give us his median projection of 22.1 DraftKings points and not have a hell of a lot more, and probably not a hell of a lot less either. It's not like Joe Harris is going to be out there with the trio stars and suddenly see 35% usage. And, even if he's out there hitting all his threes, they're not going to give him all that usage. That's where his upside is going to come from, though, is if he knocks down a few threes.
Nico G's on the super chat, and I am curious, a little extra selfishly curious how you answer this, because there's a total, or pardon me, there's an over-under, 16.5 points out there as a prop on Odds Shopper that I saw for Evan Fournier. So the question back to Nico is Fournier or Marcus Smart in a DK showdown for captain?
For captain, that's got to be Marcus Smart just based on the minutes, I would think. I don't have any of the showdown stuff in front of me, so I don't know how the pricing is going to break down for those guys over there and that, unless you're getting something dramatic from the pricing. And again, think about what you're doing with your savings. If you're doing that, it's just a more limited path for Fournier to succeed. He's got the minutes projection. Don't get me wrong. It's right there. There's just more upside in Marcus Smart here. And I assume we're getting Smart a little bit cheaper, maybe not. I don't like putting Fournier in the captain spot. I don't think it's reliable enough.
Yeah, I was looking at that really quick too, just to see. But when you take away the captain spot and you're just looking at something similar as far as those two in just overall on rosters, does that change anything with Fournier? Basically, I'm trying to say, do you like the over 16.5 for Fournier tonight?
I think there's definitely a path where he can score 17 points for sure. That's definite. We've seen him do that plenty of times in the past throughout his career. He's a scoring guy, kind of a guy. It's just, in terms of that captain question, do I want to go to the fourth banana in this offense, a guy who would normally be the fifth banana if Jaylen Brown were out there? Like, I consider Marcus Smart a bigger piece of the Boston puzzle, bigger piece of the rotation, and the guy who's more reliably going to be out there. If Fournier's having a bad game, they could yank him. They could easily look in different directions here. So I don't love the idea of going to Fournier, but yeah, I wouldn't mind throwing a little bet on with some juice on that 17 points.
You mentioned earlier, Terry, you could be talked into Austin Rivers on a couple of deeper slates. Paul Millsap earlier, now this was throughout the day on the 4-game slate, was super high owned as Greg and I were winding down. Now, looking at him where he is on the shorter slate with some options where cost isn't that big of a deal, he's dropped significantly, just under 24%, but still at 3,600. Are you even having any eyes on Millsap?
He's coming up in this crunch about 32% of the time in those optimals. So he's definitely in play for a fair share of the optimal lineups. It's just we're getting to more of his teammates ahead of him at the same position at power forward there where you can roster him. And that's JaMychal Green and Michael Porter, who are both going to be more popular, I think, on the slate. On the FanDuel side of things, I actually get Millsap behind both Aaron Gordon and JaMychal Green. I think Gordon's kind of interesting for this slate. Just a guy they went out and got, projected for 28 minutes, a guy who's produced significantly better than what we've seen from him for the most part in Denver. But when he's had the opportunity and when he's gone out and just kind of taken charge, taken the role, he's produced in a couple spots for some upside games. He's a really capable guy. He can score the ball, he can rebound the ball, and he's an underrated passer. So I think there's upside for Aaron Gordon here, depending on how they play this one. It could be a spot where they were just kind of keeping him in their pocket, waiting for the playoffs. And now we're going to see the full potential of having Aaron Gordon on this team. I think I'm not alone in that we were expecting more from him when he went to this team. It seemed like a very, very good landing spot for him. So I'm very curious about that. I think he's a more dynamic player than Paul Millsap at this point in their careers. But if Millsap's getting lower owned, he's definitely interesting. And on that DK slate where you can move him between power forward and center for 3,600, he's very interesting. It's just a limitation of the positions and the cost on FanDuel.
Yeah, just looking at where we have him on the boom bust and on Alex's boom bust probability there and looking at the percentage of optimal lineup for a guy who's going to be in single digits for boom, you're still at just under 12% for Gordon to be in that optimal lineup. So I imagine that's still something you can look at, a metric you can look at that is worth it when you're looking at somebody deeper in the lineup. So let's go even deeper than that and find a guy like Anthony Simmons, who is at 14.5% to find in an optimal lineup, as opposed to not even being 2% on the boom, but up to 60% for bust. How do you even factor that in for a guy who you're only going to pay $3,100 for on DraftKings?
Yeah, that's one of the GPP dart throws on the board for sure. We've got him projected around 17 minutes. There's a little bit maybe of upside beyond that, but not a ton. I think he's going to kind of get squeezed by the notion of a playoff rotation. So if we don't see him beyond 20 minutes, I don't know how much upside potential he's got. Could he give us the median projection that we've got on him, which is fine for the 3,100 that we have to spend on him, which is only 12.4 DraftKings points? Sure, that's easy for him to do. I don't think he's got to do very much to just pay off that salary. It's just a matter of, are we going to be able to squeeze upside out of him, and are we going to freeze out somebody who would just be better for us at that position? And again, going all the way down in that salary, 3,100, you're saving a ton as compared to some of the other options. But where are we putting? What are we getting to that's going to justify going there, and what's going to replace those fantasy points for us in comparison to some of the other guys? So he's on the board. He's definitely a value consideration. I would just like to see him. I like to get my value considerations with more reliable minutes than the 16, 17 we're really likely to see out of him tonight.
Here's Fournier, by the way, shooting up the ownership percentage on the DraftKings board. So watch out. And that, again, is a free tool available to you on Awesemo, the Awesemo Plus tool that's free for you. And it all leads up, of course, to the Hall of Fame. That's why we give everybody all of these great deals, right? That's why we keep reminding people of the great optimizers, the stacks, the boom bust, everything that you have available to you across the board, is because we want to see everybody in the Awesemo Hall of Fame. And by the looks of it, we get new people every single day. But as you know, you have to have the Awesemo profile pick first and foremost. We can't do anything unless you have the Awesemo profile pick. It's awesemo.com/avatar. Place in the top 3 of any contest with over 5,000 contestants. That shouldn't be too difficult for you out there, especially as we see so much insight here on the chat, swirling around conversation. And then just tweet your wins as you can go through win after win after win. Now, I know you've got like 6 Twitter, or you tweet at AwesemoHOF. I know you've got like 6 Twitter accounts, right, Terry? You mentioned that when I got the first show we did, when I got yours wrong, you kind of took me off the hook a little bit and said, no, I got a couple of other ones. And do we have any from you, even if it's from an old account where you're just bragging away at a $500,000 victory?
There's a couple out there, not 500,000. I don't know if I'd be sitting here if it was 500,000.
I love how you had to correct that right away.
Yeah, I thought about what I was saying there. There's a few from back in the day. I kind of try and downplay things, particularly behind the scenes here, and just let the logo get out there and speak for itself when I do something good. But we had a nice pop early in the baseball season a few weeks ago. So, I don't know if that one got tweeted out, but going back in the timeline for sure, there are some old ones in there that you can see some nice successes across all the different sports. So, yeah, a little humble brag there. We've got some in there, some fancy screenshots that would have qualified for the Hall of Fame for sure.
I love it. And on the strength of all that, pounding the over 16.5 on Fournier. It looks like more and more people piling up. Now, to be fair, Powell has dropped a little bit. Nurkic now right back up there. And as we wind down lineups, already locking in, if people are waiting on anything, maybe it's just their own second guessing. The strongest plays that we had from you tonight centered around, no pun intended, the 2 big guys, and then also looking a little bit lesser as far as the backcourts with Portland, right?
Yeah, I really like the spot for the Portland side of things. All things Portland, really. I think there's just a lot of interesting pieces over there. We mentioned Covington. We talked about him a lot. We talked about Nurk having some relevance on this slate, Norm Powell having relevance, and then the 2 guards, CJ McCollum and Dame Lillard. I think both have significant upside potential. And again, we're going to be just hunting for raw point totals in some of this. So I think a lot of those guys make sense. And as you can get to them, start building in the stars. So you're getting your value out of a Norm Powell. You're getting some value out of Covington. That helps you get to Dame. That helps you access Dame. So yeah, I really like the Portland spot. And then if you're at 100% Nikola Jokic, I don't think you're making a mistake. I do think it makes sense to mix in some other centers and get to some other pieces. But I definitely think you want as much as you can handle with Nikola Jokic in that spot. That would be Chalk City for sure, but it makes a ton of sense. Best player and best play on the slate.
Let's make Anthony the player's night here. Jeff Green or Claxton with only less than 2 minutes left, Terry?
I was actually getting to a decent amount of Claxton before. We actually, I'm glad that came up. We didn't mention it. On the FanDuel crunch that I ran at power forward across 100 lineups, I've got 8 Claxton, so that's 8%, and only 1 Jeff Green. On the DK side, I think it came up the other way. It was getting a decent amount of Jeff Green, if I remember correctly, and trying to get over to that. Actually, no, excuse me. That's wrong. I wasn't getting much of either one of them on DK. So That's a FanDuel specific one. But yeah, I was getting a little bit more Claxton than Jeff Green in that crunch on FanDuel.
Now, this didn't make the chat, but since it's my birthday today and you just celebrated one like yesterday, I think, according to the stream and all, there's no better person on this entire channel, to ask this question. But the best, most famous scene in a movie with a birthday has to be what? Ooh, flashback of The Godfather, 16 Candles.
16 Candles is interesting.
Uncle Buck with the big pancakes.
That's solid.
Come on.
I always wanted to make that pancake too. I've never made anything bigger than like your standard size pancake, but that seemed like a great idea to have. If you had that like giant griddle, pour that thing out. Hey, by the way, just real quick, I pulled up our No House Advantage prop bets page. Just give them a little plug here. They are a prop specific site, so it's something I like to do when I'm looking at prop bets. And Alex has that 52.3% to come in under 17.5 for Fournier and 47.6% to go over. So the boss is seeing it like right on the line. He's seeing that as a pretty good good number. He's got Fournier projected for 17.19 total points. So
ooh, I'm going to roll with the boss. He's the reason why we're all here, right? I'm going to roll with the boss.
There you go. Oh, that's an important point. Actually, I should call that out. Since you mentioned it, that's in a 17.5 point total. So that's a point higher. So I would think with that 17.19 projection, yeah, Alex likes the over. So those percentages I gave are wrong for the actual prop. And that's the interesting thing about No House. Because No House doesn't change it. Right. So it was a higher one that we were giving it against. So that would actually play to the over.
All right, brother. I got a lot of birthday cake to eat. I appreciate you, as does the rest of this chat here. Make sure you're following us at Digital B21 for Terry at Shander Show. Tyler, thank you, sir. Thank you to all you out there in the Awesemo community for your patience. And see, it was worth the wait. Good luck, everybody.